Hello and welcome to interest.co.nz. I'm Gareth Vaughan and I'm joined by Janet Stephenson, who's an Associate Professor and Director of the Centre for Sustainability at the University of Otago. Welcome, Janet, and thanks for joining us. Now, you've recently made some interesting comments around what's going on in the world at the moment with a COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, it's a public health crisis, but it's completely, well, not completely, but it's paused a lot of economic activity in the country at the moment. And you've suggested this is a good opportunity to redesign our economy, look to do things differently when we get back up and running. Now, I guess this comes from a perspective that there was something wrong with what we were doing before. So I'd be interested to hear from your perspective, what was wrong with what we were doing? What was wrong with how we were doing things before COVID-19 came along?
Well, I think the best way to describe that is actually to go to which identified 10 global risks facing the world that were the most serious. And one of those was infectious diseases, and we've seen the impact of that. 5 of the other 10 were environmentally related, so climate action failure, biodiversity loss, extreme weather, human-made environmental disasters, and water crises were economy seen by the World Economic Forum. So that suggests that a lot of people around the world are taking these things very seriously, and the line that I'm taking on this is that while the pandemic we're currently facing is having major short-term economic shocks and social shocks, these other risks, which are growing by the day and which are clearly caused by our current systems of production and consumption, are ones that are facing us in the future. They're longer term, therefore they're harder for the human intellect to grapple with, but they are leading us ever more into a serious pickle, which will see far greater consequences than a COVID-19 epidemic. So the line that I'm taking here is that this is our opportunity to actually, because we've got this pause and because we're going to be coming back into a situation where we're both pouring a lot of energy and innovation into reinventing the economy, and as well we're dealing with a whole lot of different constraints. So we're going to have constraints on travel, we're going to have constraints on supply chains. So these themselves are bringing in some I suppose, new criteria for us as businesses to be dealing with. So what better time than to reinvent ourselves for a sustainable future whereby our younger generations are going to thrive.
I guess one of the challenges is going to be, though, that obviously the latest figures that I've seen show, I think 1.6 million people already on the government's wage subsidies. We've got predictions of very high unemployment, the type of levels we haven't seen at least since the early 90s, possibly even longer. Of course, it's also an election year, assuming that does go ahead. And thus jobs are going to be a real focus in the short to medium term. And there'll be a lot of people saying, well, heck, any type of job will do. Shouldn't we park climate change for a while and just make sure we can all get back working again? What would you say to that?
I would say that's a bit like an alcoholic going back to a drink after having dried out for a long time. I don't think it's a very good idea, because it's very easy to slip back into patterns of the way we do business that are just going to lead us back into the trouble we're heading for in any case. So I actually, the analogy I use is a set of train tracks, and that is that economies typically run on train tracks, in that what we've done in the past tends to then build what we do in the future. So there's what's called a path dependence about the way we do economy. This pause in the economy and the unprecedented change, and also the effort and pouring their money into something to create jobs, it creates a huge opportunity for us to relay those tracks in a very different direction towards a sustainable future. And I think the fact that we're needing to create jobs doesn't mean they have to be jobs that are leading us back to the 20th century. they can be investments that lead us into a 21st century solution.
What sort of areas are you thinking of there?
Oh, goodness. All sorts of things. We're looking at clean energy opportunities. We're looking at businesses getting into circular economy. Lots of new businesses that I'm aware of have been already focusing on, I guess, the changes in consumer appetite for more sustainable products and services. We're looking at investments, I would suggest, in things like massively improving our building stock, which not only has health and welfare benefits, but also long-term savings for everybody. Yeah, thinking quite creatively about, there are so many opportunities to do things differently, investing in new forms of transport that are going to actually be future-proofing us, as opposed to creating even greater reliance on fossil fuels. So, I mean, you could come up with lots of options, from what the government should be doing in terms of its shovel-ready projects, through to what potentially councils might be deciding to invest in, to what businesses are doing, right through to what individual families might be looking at. So at each scale, there are many things we can be doing to be resetting our economy and society into a sustainable future. And just looking, I've been avidly kind of watching the debates online, what's coming through, and this pause really does seem to have, I think, enabled people to sit back a little bit, give them time to think. I mean, a lot of families are under a lot of stress, but as well as that, as being under stress, there's been a pause from the usual activities. So we're thinking about what is it that makes life important. And I think a lot of us are realizing actually that our families and that our health and welfare are the most important things.
A period of reflection, indeed. You also talk about increasing local, regional and national self-sufficiency. Before we get into that, obviously New Zealand's forged quite a lot of its wealth, I guess, over the years off the back of being an exporting country. So trade has been very important to us. Obviously that's trickier at the moment than it certainly has been. What's your expectation, I guess, going forward for exporting and the whole globalization sort of program, I guess, if that's the way of putting it, or globalization as a concept around the world?
I guess I through an economics lens, but I do read widely, and I've been working in the sustainability area for about 15 years as a social scientist. So I've got a broad interest in what's happening globally and locally around sustainability initiatives and all the rest. And I mean, what I'm seeing in our future in terms of globalization is that both New Zealand and other countries in the world have very much had a very strong globalization agenda over the last, I don't know, 30 or 40 years, very seriously so. And that's not really been impeded by very much. But COVID is seriously hampering that, both in restricting the movement of people. For New Zealand, I think that will be particularly severe because we're likely to try to eradicate the virus completely, which may well mean having to close our borders very seriously for quite a period of time. And that in itself brings, I mean, it's not to say we're not still going to be trading in goods. I'm sure we will be in a big way, but large parts of our economy are not going to be possible to continue as usual. And also there may well be breakdowns in other supply chains that we're accustomed to just because of what's happening economically at a global scale and in the individual countries that we tend to trade with. So that says to me that we need to really start looking at how can we be more self-sufficient in essential goods and services within New Zealand and not be quite so reliant on global supply chains, because they could well break down, or they could be just more difficult, more expensive to achieve over the coming years. And that's not going to, I mean, it's a benefit if we can be more locally resilient, because we are a country in any case that tends to have a lot of natural disasters. So local resilience also assists with dealing with the earthquakes and floods and things we tend to face as a country.
So when you talk about being increasing local, regional and national self-sufficiency, is this a case of starting, I guess, from your own community and moving outwards, is it, in terms of how things are done and where you get things from?
Yeah, I mean, it's been interesting. I think one of the first things to run out, apart from toilet paper, as the COVID crisis hit, was actually seeds, garden seeds and seedlings. So faced with the crisis, people do naturally tend to think, how can we look after our families? And at least in the short term, let's garden. And so those sort of concepts of how can we best look after ourselves within our own property, and then a bit wider, how can we actually manage our food systems and maybe our energy systems more locally so that we're more resilient, and then building out from there. I think also that given we're going to be facing a period right now where the local economies need to start building up, the more that we can actually stimulate our local economies by buying local, by supporting our local businesses, the better. And so I think localization also has a really important role to play there. Not buying off Amazon, but buying from your local store.
And you're an advocate of a circular economy. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Right. So this is a concept that's really well developed internationally, and even is definitely being talked about seriously within New Zealand and in government circles presently. And many of the businesses around New Zealand will already be familiar with this concept. But essentially, it is it is thinking about the processing of raw material, product or a service, but as well as that, your circular economy is both that we need to be using all the time. Let's use it as efficiently as possible. Let's produce products that are going to last as long as possible. And let's try and make sure that out the far end of that, the waste that's produced can be reused in some way. So, I mean, an extreme example is a company internationally which actually leases the carpets that it lays in your house, with the guarantee that once you finish with them, it will take them back and reuse them and relay carpets. So that kind of concept, but it can be developed in many different ways. But so any particular business would need to think about what the circular economy aspects might be for itself. But essentially, it's trying to use our resources much more efficiently and to reduce the waste streams out of the far end of that.
Okay, so in terms of a sustainable future, if we were to reboot along the lines that you're suggesting, what would the sustainable future look like, or what would you like it to look like?
Well, I actually talk about 7 stars, or whetū, the Māori word for stars, that I've identified, all of which are very much common discussion points, commonly known, commonly accepted ways that we need to move, but into the future. But I'm saying let's think about them as a constellation that we need to head in the direction of all these 7 stars at the same time. So the first one is radically reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So whatever your business, what can you do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions? We're going to have to anyway. It's part of New Zealand's commitment by 2050 to become carbon net zero. So let's get on with it right now. The second is preparing for the impacts of climate change. Now, most businesses in New Zealand will have some degree of vulnerability to climate change, whether it's in their supply chains or their customers or their buildings. Maybe their shareholders are worried about greenhouse gas emissions. There's some vulnerabilities there. So discover what they are and invest to reduce that vulnerability and to adapt to the changes ahead. The third one is about restoring the vitality of natural systems. So our whole economy is dependent on the productivity of soils, the productivity, the greenhouse gas absorption of our forests, etc. So let's make those as vital and as effective as they can be. The fourth one is the one you've raised already about national, regional and local self-sufficiency or resilience. The fifth one is circular economy. So let's see what we can do to become as efficient as we can with our resource use. Number 6 is being socially responsible. So thinking about what are the equity implications of the kinds of investments, or are we working towards actually a greater sharing of those goods so that we don't get people who are absolutely at the bottom end and at risk of becoming worse off every time there's a crisis. And the fifth one is tato tato. It's about working together across governments and business, across communities and councils, across iwi and entrepreneurs. All over the place, there are many opportunities to do things differently. And I was interested actually to see that the government itself is looking to develop some sort of public-private partnerships as we enter into the post-COVID economy, and that's a sign of the times, I think. So those 7 items really create a constellation, and that I'm suggesting that all of us should be aiming to actually hit all of those at once, with the plans every time we make an investment decision, every time we try and make a decision about, okay, what's the plan for our next stage? Let's take those stars all into account as we plan forward.
Okay, look, thanks a lot for that, Janet. That's Janet Stephenson, Associate Professor and Director of the Centre for Sustainability at the University of Otago, and I'm Gareth Vaughan at interest.co.nz.